On today's edition of the show, the Florida Panthers are looking to let the good times roll as they hope to take a 2-0 series lead. We're also going to make an argument for Carter Verhaeghe possibly being the best Panthers goal scorer ever. And we're going to discuss from the Toronto Maple Leaf side of things who would need to have a better game too. And from the Florida Panthers side of things, who we want to continue seeing play well.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome to this Thursday, May 4th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers, and also on Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to our everydayers who come here to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast to get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So the Florida Panthers, of course, taking the 1-0 lead and it being an off day for the Cats going into game 2. We're feeling good about ourselves, of course, with the Panthers, with a big opportunity for them to go up 2-0 before heading home to Sunrise. But we do have a very special guest today on the show. It is a very familiar voice on the Locked On NHL family. He is one of the co-hosts of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast. And not only is he one of the hosts of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast, but he is also a Toronto Maple Leafs fan as well, to discuss the what he saw from game 1. And we're going to dig deep really into today's show with one of the co-hosts, Steele Rodin. Steele, welcome to Locked On Panthers.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad that you invited me on the podcast, on the episode for today, to discuss what happened in game 1. You must be over the moon right now with the Panthers up 1-0 in the series. Obviously a big first round series against the Boston Bruins. Ton of confidence for you guys right now.
No doubt, lots of confidence for the Panthers. And I said it on Wednesday's show how it really benefited the Panthers that it was a very quick turnaround from one series to the next. And listen, it's carrying that those good fortunes for the Panthers. But I want you to give your opinions, of course, as the Leaf fan, on what you saw from game 1 from the Toronto Maple Leafs side of things, and how the Maple Leafs performed, and whether they gave themselves a good chance to win on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I thought the game for both teams was incredible. I thought this was the first time all postseason that the Leafs actually showed up in the first period, right from puck drop. Were fast, were physical. Both teams, I thought it was probably the best game for the Toronto Maple Leafs out of all 7 games they've played so far this playoffs. But right from the puck drop, they showed up, which they're notorious to never show up in the first period. So that was great to see. But right from puck drop, the intensity for both teams, the physicality from both teams. And I love the fact that the officiating didn't get in the way of things. There was maybe only 4 or 5 penalties in the entire game. The puck was going back and forth with very long sequences without a whistle. So just the play itself was great because the whistle, the officials weren't getting in the way of the actual game. And I thought the penalties were actually good calls overall. So I love the officiating. I love the play from both sides. And I did think that the Leafs gave themselves a great chance at winning this game. I know we're going to talk about that goalie matchup between Bobrovsky and Ilya Samsonov, but they gave themselves a ton of opportunities in the first period, especially in the first 5 minutes. Matthews was on a partial breakaway, but Sergei Bobrovsky was unreal. I thought he was sensational. I thought, Obviously, you've got Tkachuk doing his things, 3 assists, Barkov 2 assists. But I thought Sergei Bobrovsky was the best player for the Panthers. Clutch saves in the first period, even down the stretch when they were down 4-2. I thought it was a great game. I thought it could have gone either way, but the Panthers buried on their opportunities.
Yeah, and I don't think for the Panther side of things it was necessarily won in the first 5 minutes, but the fact that they were able to kill those two penalties when they went to the box very early on, it really gave them the confidence to go the rest of the way. And digging deeper into how the Panthers perform, and the second line, a 15-5 Corsi 4 percentage, which was great. Shot on goal advantage 8-4, and it's crazy. As far as goals for and goals against at 5-on-5, you see 1-1, but you think about what that goal against was, and it was that 9 seconds after the Florida Panthers went up 2-0, and then just a little bit lackadaisical after the face-off, and then Matthew Nyes going with that spinorama move. So really only a 9-second brain fart for the Panthers there. But I also want to give a lot of praise to this one player. I said this on Twitter after my episode, but I want to say it on the podcast, is Nick Cousins. Nick Cousins' experience in playing, even though he only played seven regular season games for the Vegas Golden Knights, those 17 postseason games that he played for the Vegas Golden Knights a few years ago when they made it to the Western Conference Final is so valuable. And then Paul Maurice taking a little bit of time to get to the lines that he wanted to for this series, and being able to put Lundell back with Reinhart, who he succeeded with last season, and then putting them back together, and then it's creating that balancing act. And Nick Cousins for the Florida Panthers side of things, he signed for another year, which is great. It wasn't a signing for me that I saw as like, okay, I saw it as a veteran experience, but I wasn't thinking a huge, crazy, impactful player. But for now that I'm looking back at it, as far as the experience factor of it, it's such a great signing for Bill Zito.
Yeah, and that's what you need come playoff time. And for, the bottom 6 depth players, I think the Toronto Maple Leafs do have a little bit more of an advantage in the bottom 6, or just the entire forward group. But that's what you need in playoff games. You need guys like Nick Cousins. I know Ryan Lomberg's hurt right now, but he brings an edge to the game as well. You need those type of guys to produce some sort of spark, or get some type of dirty goal. And that's exactly what Cousins did. The puck was around the net. It bounced off a few players, and and he's the one that finds it right in front of the crease, and he lifts it past Samsonov. So when you have guys like that and they show up, it's the best feeling in the world. And exactly your point, those 17 games in the playoffs with the Vegas Golden Knights a few years back has really helped him in the postseason as well. And I got to show some love to Paul Maurice, because he's one of my favorite coaches out there. I absolutely love him. He spent some time in Toronto as a head coach as well, in Winnipeg the last couple of years. But he's been very successful wherever he goes. I love the fact that he's not afraid to change up the lines on the fly, see what's working, see what's not. I love his post-game conferences, so blunt with the questions. He, to me, is one of the best coaches out there in the game right now. And he did a fantastic job on switching those lineups. I like that Sheldon Keefe does that as well too. Just like absolutely loading up that top line, or getting Ryan O'Reilly to go drop down to the third line center. So both coaches are very adamant on, matching lines and switching lines when things aren't working. And that's what Paul Maurice did a great job in game 1.
Yeah, and a little bit of a quote that Paul Maurice said on the off day, about when asked about Nick Cousins online too. He said, "quote He's got a set of hands that allows him to play with his hands, and his hands he can make plays with the two fellas." He's talking about Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk. And for the Florida Panthers side of things, the fact that they also talked about how Bennett and Tkachuk, the fact that they're the two youngest guys going into Calgary in their first few seasons, and getting to know each other and being together off the ice as well. That second line is just producing so well for the Panthers, and it really has been all postseason long. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2. We're going to discuss more about the goalie matchup and make an argument about Carter Verhaeghe possibly being the best goal scorer the Florida Panthers have ever seen. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Built Bar. Are you looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the sugar and calories? Then you got to have the best tasting protein bar ever. Built. You got to try this. What makes Built Bars so good? For starters, are covering 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. They come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter, brownie, cookies and cream. And now you don't need to wait to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. And now you can get them at your local Walmart, Sam's Club, while you can still get your specialty flavors at Built.com. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Walk to the pharmacy section. Grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, bar, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter, puff, and churro puffs. You can thank me later. Segment number 2 here on this Thursday, May 4th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And for all the Star Wars fans out there, May the 4th be with you. And every day on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show, where Nick Fairbanks will be back on the show as we do a post-game edition for the Florida Panthers versus Toronto Maple Leafs game 2. So, Steele, for the Florida Panthers side of things, they are very, very familiar with Ilya Samsonov. Of course, the Florida Panthers going against Samsonov against when he played for the Washington Capitals. And of course, the goalie turnover for the Maple Leafs last year, of course, having Jack Campbell, and of course making that trade for Matt Murray, which we hope that Matt Murray's okay after that collision that happened towards the end of the season. But the numbers for Samsonov are better in the postseason last year than they are this year. But I know it doesn't tell the whole story. They got through their demons in the first round for Samsonov. He took a little bit of a stinger for in warmups that put it in question. And I was talking about it in one of my group chats, and the discussion was shoot high on Samsonov, since that's where he took the puck. But I look at this goalie matchup as well, and then talking about Bobrovsky, the 2-time Vezina Trophy winner, and I was asking myself, is Vezina Bob back? And he showed a lot of signs of that in game 1, and of course, plenty of series left in this series. But what's your confidence level in the goalie situation for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
I'm very confident with Ilya Samsonov. And yeah, the stats aren't there. Obviously, he put up a 7 spot in game 1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So that's going to drop the numbers down significantly. But, it's great for both him and the Toronto Maple Leafs to get out of the first round, because you look at the stats from last year, or the 2 years that he was with the Washington Capitals. I think he was 1-5 or 1-6 in a postseason record. And finally, he's got his first series win against the Tampa Bay Lightning, which is a huge ask. So I'm very confident with Ilya Samsonov moving forward. It is scary, though, how Sergei Bobrovsky is playing right now. And when we talk about fantasy on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast, I've talked about Sergei Bobrovsky a lot because I've drafted him probably 3 times over the last 3 years. And this year he was awful in the regular season. But the great thing about Bobrovsky is he's a streaky goalie. And when he starts heading in the right direction, it's almost impossible to get by him or win those games. And that's what he's doing right now. When I look back to that first round series against Boston, I thought for sure that Alex Lyon was going to be back in the crease for game 5. But Paul Maurice, that's why he's the head coach. That's why he's in the NHL. He went with that decision to go with Bobcat back in net, and that's why they have him. We can talk about the contract. The contract's terrible, but he's showing up right now. So that scares me for the Florida Panthers side of things, because if Bobrovsky plays like this, it's going to be a very difficult series for Toronto. But I'm not worried whatsoever. I have a ton of confidence in Ilya Samsonov to get the job done again. I have the confidence in the Toronto Maple Leafs. If you look back at the last 8 game 1s they've had over the last 7 years, they're 2-6 in game 1. They are terrible. That's what I was talking about before. They are terrible at starting games. Even in the regular season, they're awful in October. But once November and December start hitting, that's when they really start pushing up the standings. And so, yeah, they dropped game 1. It wasn't the best effort from Samsonov on a couple of those goals. I thought he should have been a little bit more focus for them. But again, you can't put a ton of blame on just him. It was a full team effort. But again, a ton of confidence for Samsonov. They lost game 1 in the first round against Tampa. They lose game 1 against Florida. 2 Florida teams. It's happening again. I think they're going to come back for game 2 at home and put on a good show for the Leaf fans out there.
Yeah, and for the Florida Panthers side of things, talking about game 1s, this was their first game 1 win since 1997. So crazy to think that the Florida Panthers are ahead in a series. Also, one thing I wanted to talk about because Carter Verhaeghe just breaking the record for most postseason goals in a Florida Panthers sweater ever. And of course, the Florida Panthers history isn't rich when it comes to postseason success. Of course, both what these teams have in common is they had a decade and a half plus of not winning a playoff series. So of course, at least, well, even though the Maple Leafs have been around for over 100 years, but I'm talking about the last quarter century as far as postseason success. But Carter Verhaeghe, there's an argument to make that he's possibly the best goal scorer ever for the Florida Panthers. And when you look at 2023, 15.3% shooting percentage of a 40 goal scorer, most that he's ever had in a season at any level. That includes Syracuse Crunch, that includes Tampa, that includes his time with Toronto when he was drafted, but also the postseason. Last year in the postseason, his shooting percentage was at 27.3, 6 points and 6 assists. And this year, his shooting percentage is even higher in the postseason than it is at the regular season. In the regular season, 3 goals and 6 assists with 3 game-winning goals, mind you. And it's crazy. Former Tampa Bay Lightning players are actually performing really great in the postseason. Yanni Gourde got a game-winning goal. Andre Palat has one as well. And Barkov in the President's Trophy winning season, he was at an 18.2 shooting percentage and had 39 goals in 67 games last year, mind you, Alexander Barkov. So there's an argument to make about best goal scorer ever. And going back all the way to the late 90s, Pavel Bure, 360 shots on goal in 1999, while with 384 in 2000, 16.11% shooting percentage in 99 and 15.36 with 58 and 59 goals respectively. And carried the Florida Panthers to the playoffs in 2000 before getting swept by the New Jersey Devils in that year. But there is a big argument to say about Carter Verhaeghe possibly being the best goal scorer ever that the Panthers have ever had. And I want to give it to you, where on your show recently you sang high praises on what Carter Verhaeghe can do on the ice.
Yeah, both Flip and I from the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast love this player. We think that his fantasy value for next season is going to skyrocket after what we've witnessed in the regular season and now in the postseason. Playing with guys like Barkov and Max Tkachuk just elevates his game to another standard that he has now. I think it might be a little bit of a stretch to call him the Florida Panthers' best goal scorer just because he's only been with the team for 3 years. He's only been in the league for 4 years too. So it might be a little bit of a stretch to call him the best goal scorer for Panthers, because the way that I'm looking at it is we got to look at who he's playing with right now. You know, Correct. You've got Barkov, who's one of the best playmakers in the NHL. Matthew Tkachuk, back-to-back 100-plus seasons, continuing to show that he's one of the best players now in the NHL as well. So when you are set up with those type of players, it elevates your game to another standard, another level and another standard, which he needs to keep at this point. The thing I love about Carter Verhaeghe, and I was preaching this on the last few episodes, his wrist shot is one of the most underrated wrist shots I've seen in the NHL this year. He snaps that puck so quick, and we saw it on the third goal in game 1. He gets, sent on a partial breakaway and just freezes Samsonov. Samsonov didn't even know what to do. He just fell backwards and he ripped it post in. And that's the thing I love about Verhaeghe now that he's playing with guys like Tkachuk and Barkov. That part of his game is going to continue to get better. I'm hesitant to say that he's the best goal scorer in Panthers history. I got to see another couple of years to see if he can put up another 40-goal season. At that point, we'll have to have another discussion about Verhaeghe, but absolutely love him. If you're in fantasy hockey leagues, he's a player to keep an eye on for next season.
Yeah, he's definitely on track. Not saying
Oh
that
yeah,
he
he's going up.
definitely is, but starting to see the trajectory where Carter Verhaeghe
Yeah.
is going. And on that goal, looking back at the replay once again, got to give a lot of credit, which David Rodriguez of Panthers Twitter posted it, and I was able to see the play again. Josh Mahura made a great breakup play as there was a set feed to Noel Chari, and
Yeah.
that's what caused Barkov to have that breakout to Anthony Duclair, and all the Maple Leafs, three Maple Leafs players focusing on Duclair and then leaving Carter Verhaeghe alone. You don't want to leave Carter Verhaeghe on a
It was a terrible pinch by TJ Brody. You know, he could have easily just played the defensive zone and just gone one-on-one, but he went for the puck. It was a terrible pinch, and that's what happens. They bury on those opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. So great play by Barkov there. Even though he only has one goal in the postseason, and crazy to think that what could happen if Barkov in fact does come alive. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to ask Steele about who are the players that he wants to see step up more in game 2 for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and we're going to discuss who I want to see continue to play well for the Florida Panthers side of things as game 2 approaches on Thursday night. We're going to discuss this more on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment on this Thursday, May 4th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And thank you once again to the everydayers who are here to get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Before we dig into this third and final segment, I want to say congratulations to the Florida Panthers ECHL affiliate, the Florida Everblades, for advancing to the next round of the Kelly Cup playoffs after defeating the South Carolina Stingrays in 6 games. They will be facing the Jacksonville Icemen in the next round. And unfortunately, this is recorded before the Charlotte Checkers in the AHL take on the Hershey Bears to avoid elimination. Right now, the Charlotte Checkers are down 0-2 against the Washington Capitals affiliate, Hershey Bears. But we have a game to discuss tonight between the Florida Panthers and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I spoke all about how the Florida Panthers were able to contain a Matthews, a Tavares, and more importantly, William Nylander. William Nylander had the majority of the best chances for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I was talking about on yesterday's episode how he's probably going to see Sergei Bobrovsky in his nightmares. But Mitch Marner, only one shot on goal in game 1 for the Maple Leafs. But who is that guy who you want to see step up more in game 2 for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
If I have to go with what, because I really loved game 1. I didn't think the Leafs made a lot of mistakes. I think if you pinpoint the mistakes, it's the Matthew Nyes. I forget who scored. Sam Bennett scored that second goal. He should have pushed over to the boards. He was caught in the middle of the ice and he got his stick in the way from the point shot, deflected, and then Bennett got another piece on it. So I think that was one mistake, but he's 20 years old. He's still learning. He's his first crack in the postseason, really. So he's going to make mistakes, but he bounced back right away. He got the goal 9 seconds later. I think the defensive group, if I pinpoint again, TJ Brody and Jake McCabe got to worry about their pinches. I think that's what got caught on the Carter Verhaeghe goal and a few other opportunities for the Panthers. But if I'm going to single out anyone, and again, I thought from both teams' perspective, it was a great hockey game. Ilya Samsonov needs to be better. He needs to be what Sergei Bobrovsky was in game 1. If he can make that extra save or that extra effort just to get across, make that game-saving stop, what the Leafs need a few times in a game, almost every game they need one of those stops. If he can put up that for the Toronto Maple Leafs, then I think game 2 is going to be a very good game, but go in the Leafs' favor. Because realistically, when I look back at game 1, again, Matthews, Marner, Tavares, O'Reilly, there were a ton of chances all around the ice. Bobrovsky was sensational. And I know the Leafs went 0 for 4 on the power play, but I thought their power play was amazing.
Yeah.
They were able to enter the zone to perfect. That's been one of the most frustrating things for me as a Maple Leafs fan, yelling at my TV when they're trying to get into the zone, because I am sick and tired of Morgan Rielly dropping it back and then Marner dropping it again to Matthews. And then all 4 of their players are stagnant on the blue line and they have no speed. They have no entry into the zone. But in game 1, they were amazing on the power play. They need to figure out a way to actually score on the power play. But I thought the zone entry, the puck movement, the rotations of players moving around the ice and trying to get open, they had the opportunities, but Bobrovsky was so good that they couldn't get by him. So again, I'm nitpicking a little here, but Ilya Samsonov needs to come up with some, 1 or 2 big saves to keep them in the game. And then if they can score at least once on the power play, that sets up the rest of the game for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, and like you said, even in the first segment, it was a goal. It was like 2 goalies just performing so well. There wasn't even on the Toronto Maple Leafs side of things. I wasn't even thinking, oh, that's a. I wasn't even thinking that's a bad goal by Samsonov. I was just thinking, and also you mentioned that there's a total of 5 penalties. Let's not forget that on the Montour goal, that it was a delayed penalty as well, and a great screen by Mark Stahl that took away the eyes of Ilya Samsonov. And for the Florida Panthers side of things, I just think they need to continue taking those eyes away from Ilya Samsonov, getting pucks in deep, especially getting it to the corner as well. It's funny because the first 2 penalties for the Panthers that they took, they both happen to be in the corners as well for the Panthers side of things. So and Paul Maurice has also spoken about how this is a team that's going to commit penalties. And I was seeing a lot of overreaction on social media of that comment. I'm like thinking that he's barking at the refs. I'm like, no, it's not him barking at the refs. It's the Panthers style of play that's going to cause them to go to the box. Yeah. And during his time in Winnipeg, when he was the coach of the Winnipeg Jets, his teams were second most penalty infraction minutes during his tenure of eight years in Winnipeg. Number 1 was Pittsburgh, and they got 2 cups out of that. So it's not going to the box necessarily isn't an indication of lack of success. 59% on the penalty kill in round 1. Yeah, it's a new series for the Panthers, but the Panthers weren't not also forcing the Toronto Maple Leafs to the half wall as much as they were to the Boston Bruins in round 1. They were getting in front. They were on the doorstep. And like you said at the beginning, it was basically the Sergei Bobrovsky show.
Yeah, it really was. And, I love Paul Maurice. I watched that post-game conference afterwards, and I love his comments where he was literally just like, he's like, we've given up on trying to talk to the refs. We've started to realize that we are going to have more penalties than the other team. And that's just the way it is. And that's how we're going to continue to play. So I love his comments on how blunt he is, but it's been that way for the Panthers, and they got out of round 1, a great comeback against the Bruins, and they were able to stop the Maple Leafs on the power play in game 1 in the second round. So I think, honestly, if they can just replicate what they did in game 1, they have a really good chance at going deep in the playoffs and even getting past the Maple Leafs if they continue to play like that. And again, if Bobrovsky steps up and stands tall. And I want to say this for the last thing here. I honestly think Matthew Tkachuk might be the most talented player in the NHL, and not just talking about his hockey skills, but I'm also talking about his ability to be physical, but not physical enough where he's going to take those penalties. Because I look back to that game 1 again, he had 6 monstrous hits in that first period. He was all over the ice, clean body checks. He wasn't running around, charging people or taking any dumb penalties. He was playing phenomenal hockey to a T. He sets up his teammates, get 3 assists. So if Matthew Tkachuk can continue to do that, play aggressive, stay out of the box, again, go back to Sheldon Keefe. Don't get in the antics with Matthew Tkachuk, because he will draw a penalty on you. And if he continues to play like that, it's going to be, again, more trouble for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, and the Toronto Maple Leafs were also trying to do it back to him. I remember there was one from Luke Schenn in the game that really got Matthew Tkachuk good. And Matthew Tkachuk also spoke to the media on Wednesday about taking big hits and bouncing right back up. This is from Jameson Olive of FloridaPanthers.com. This quote is, quote, "That's playoff hockey. You got to take a few hits and make plays at this time of year. Dish them out, but you've got to take them," close quote. And you know what? That's it. And I've been talking about all season about the grit that Matthew Tkachuk brings, and that he is not the guy that that is going to allow someone to bully him on the ice, and he's going to get right back up, and just the energy that he feeds off, and the belief, and yeah, he has an A on his sweater. It's not the C. And you know what? A lot of Panther fans were asking and begging to have him as the C, which I don't agree with. But
no,
he is also a guy that where when he talks, you listen, and the team follows his lead, and he is just an incredible leader for this Florida Panthers team. And he even guaranteed after Game 5 that they'd be back in that locker room at TD Garden. Look what happens, and the position that the Florida Panthers are in, and 1-0, and it's an opportunity. It's a big opportunity to just get a stranglehold on this game too. And listen, home ice doesn't mean as much in the NHL of all leagues versus the other ones. So it's a big opportunity for the Panthers. Any final words here, Steele, before we sign off for the night?
Let's go Maple Leafs, baby. Game 2 tonight. Get ready.
Yep, and for my end, go Panthers, obviously. But Steele, thank you so much for joining me on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. May the 4th be with you, and may the 4th be with all the listeners listening here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tell everybody where they can follow you. Tell everybody more about your work as well on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast.
Yeah, make sure you go follow our YouTube channel, Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. We're on our way to 1,000 subscribers, so any help means the world to both Flip and I. If you want to follow us on Twitter, it's LO_FantasyNHL. My personal Twitter is Srodin_77. But if you want any information or any advice on betting, gambling, and fantasy hockey, that's where you can find us.
Awesome. And make sure to follow him there, and you'll definitely see everything from betting and all on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast. So Steele, thank you so much, and I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, man.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steele Rodin, Locked On NHL, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And every dayers, make sure to come back on Friday for the Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, as Nick Fairbanks will be back for a Fairbanks Friday edition to recap the Florida Panthers versus Toronto Maple Leafs game. So I'm Armando Velez with Steele Rodin, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.